We got a lot to talk about because, look, the Eagles have a huge game, obviously, on Sunday, right? They're not out of the water yet. They beat the Cowboys, but they still need to beat the Giants, or the Cowboys could lose to Washington. You can't bank on that. You never know. The bottom line is they still control their own destiny, but they got to win here to get in unless they get help, and you can never rely on anybody's help. And I sense that people are nervous about this game. We're going to talk about that a little bit, about whether or not you're nervous, what you have to fear. I have a couple of things in my mind that I think people are fearing, and it may just be that the only thing to fear is fear itself with this game. You know what I'm saying? We'll talk about that. Obviously, the Sixers. You heard the music as we started the show. Huge win against the Bucks. Now, I'm curious to you guys, because I said this to a bunch of my family while the game was on. The Sixers open up a 20-something lead. It's the second quarter, and I looked at my brother-in-law and I said, I really look forward to this being a 5-point game with 2 minutes left. I did. I figured it was going to be like the Denver Nuggets game earlier in the year that they lost.
Yep.
I wasn't sure they were going to lose or at home. They had the crowd, but I did not think that they were going to bash the Bucks from start to finish the way they did.
How could you, right? You can't predict that, especially the way the Sixers have been playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been inconsistent. They look good at times, and Embiid will look great, Ben won't, vice versa. Tobias will have a big night, Richardson's out. We all know the injuries, the lineup changes, everything that's been going on with this team has really led to a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
So going into that game yesterday, Geoff and Hunter, you didn't know what to expect, and it was the best case scenario all around. That is exactly how Elton Brand was dreaming that this team would look when he put this team together in the offseason. And Giannis finally looked human. That was his worst game probably of his career.
And I will say the Sixers have a knack over the last 2 years of making Giannis look human. Not all the time, but recently, going back to 2 years ago when they won that game by 50, they put Joel on him when they can, and they seem to get favorable matchups out of that.
Yeah, definitely. I lean towards being a Brett Brown supporter, and I don't even think I'm much of a Brett Brown supporter. I'm just not a basher, because there's a lot of people in the city that think he's the worst, he stinks, he's the worst coach in the NBA.
Yeah.
And I lean towards saying, well, that's just false. He's not the worst coach in the NBA, so it makes it seem like I support him more than I do.
Who is the worst coach in the NBA?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. But
it's a title that gets thrown around a lot of coaches, but nobody
right.
seems to be able to claim it.
Anyone who's the head coach of the Knicks, that's the worst coach in the NBA.
But my point is, he put together a game plan defensively to really stop this guy with Joel Embiid, Al Horford. You even saw Ben Simmons sometimes get thrown in there just because that's the value of a 6'10 point guard. So, he gets ridiculed so much. How can you not walk away and say, defensively, he just stopped someone who the whole league can't figure out a way to stop? So I give a lot of credit to Brett Brown in this one.
Yeah, I think, yes, because we were kind of hard on Brett when they lost. Who was it that they lost to? Miami, right? Where it's like you didn't respond to the zone well enough. You didn't have your guys ready to play. You said you were prepared for it, and the fact that they looked unprepared for it was worse. But then again, and I hate to channel my inner Mike Gill here, it is a game, right? And it was a game that got out of hand really quickly for Milwaukee. And it's also a game in which the Sixers – Ryan, you actually called it the best case scenario, and that is true. But how often does any team have its best case scenario play out night in, night out, night in, night out, right? I understand what you're saying.
Never.
That's what we all want the Sixers to be, but it's not like I expect them to play this kind of game against Milwaukee.
21 three-pointers.
Exactly. So there's a part of the game where you're just like, man, they just had it. They had it that night. And that's great that they did, but it's just that they had it.
From a shooting standpoint, especially beyond the arc, they just had everything going.
Right.
Like that's not something that we should ever expect to happen again. They tied a franchise record with 21 three-pointers made. So that was just a special day. But when I say best case scenario, that's really the first time we saw the Sixers play like how they were built, if that makes sense.
Do you think that they were built that way, though? Because I don't know if they were built to shoot that many threes. I think defensively.
I'm talking defensively.
Okay,
I'm not,
just
that's
defensively.
why I gave the disclaimer. The three-point aspect from yesterday's game is not something that I'm banking on to happen again. But from a defensive standpoint and from an effort standpoint and transition and rebounding and taking care of the ball, those are the things that in a playoff-like atmosphere they're going to have success.
So let me ask you that.
Hopefully.
Because I would agree with you on that. I think defensively this is what they were meant to do, especially to a team like Milwaukee that has an MVP in Giannis, but they're very streaky with their three-point shooting in the playoffs. At least they were. They didn't shoot as well in the playoffs last year as they did throughout the regular season, and that's why they were bounced.
But do you know why they didn't shoot well in the postseason eventually?
Was it the length?
Well, it was Horford had a lot of success against him. I'm not crediting Al Horford for why the Bucks got eliminated, but my point
he is that type of player that hurts you in the playoffs.
The head of the snake is obviously the Greek Freak, but more so than any other team in the NBA because everything runs through him.
Right.
He goes head first, down the court, transition into the lane, and then the shooters, fall into place.
Yep.
So if he gets out of rhythm, the Bucks really don't know what to do with themselves. They showed it last year in the postseason.
They do not have a secondary threat.
They have no secondary
threat. Nobody
threat.
who can step up there. They have nice complementary players.
Exactly.
But they're all complementary to Giannis being Giannis.
Exactly. And even, Chris Middleton's a great player, similar to Tobias Harris. But if Giannis is having a bad day, they crumble. Mm-hmm. And the Sixers are best equipped in the entire NBA to, I think, defeat the Bucks in a 7-game series.
I definitely agree with that. The one thing I take away out of this is they beat Boston twice. They beat Miami. They beat the Pacers. They beat the Bucks. They beat Toronto.
So they're 6-2, I think, against the top 4 teams, discounting them in the conference.
Right. So it's easy to get so frustrated with these little losses throughout the season. But what they have shown me is they can beat the top teams in this league when they are mentally checked in to do so, and that's nice to know. It's concerning because the Sixers play so well at home. And if this game was played in Milwaukee, will it play out the same way? Who knows? So that's why it's frustrating during the regular season when they lose to the Wizards, when they lose to these bad teams, and it doesn't seem like they're engaged because you know that they can beat these top teams in the league.
I feel like we always find a way back to this conversation where it's how important are these games? You can't take too much of a loss. You can't take too much of a win. And for me, this was a huge win for the Sixers, and part of the reason why I think they played so well is they wanted it way more than the Bucks. They know that they've been inconsistent. They hear the criticism and all of the, the magnifying glass over.
Certainly Joel put forth a game, and then even his comments after the game suggested that he would this thing red circled on the calendar.
Absolutely. And, the Bucks they're on pace to have a historic season, potentially have a 73-win season.
Yeah.
So they're coming into town with the ups and downs that you've had. They wanted to deliver a knockout punch, and they certainly did. I don't think the Bucks are ready for it.
I think what I wonder, though, going back to the best-case scenario is if they didn't shoot the lights out of the ball, right? If they had a typical Sixers offensive
normal,
night,
yeah.
Right? Were they good enough defensively to have won that game anyway?
Yeah, I think so.
On Giannis, they were. I mean, because you can cough up his bad game to what they were doing defensively on him. Middleton did have 31 points, though.
He did.
He did.
And the Sixers only turned the ball over, I believe, 8 times, which is
9 times, I think it was.
Yeah,
whatever it is. Very good.
Huge part of this game. Now, one thing, when the Sixers struggled against the Miami Heat a few games ago, and they weren't shooting good against the zone, and it looked awful. Everyone was talking about how it looked like that affected their defensive side of the floor because they were shooting so poorly offensively.
Right.
It took them out of it defensively. Well, I think because they played so good defensively, it sparked their offensive side of the game to a
100%.
really high level.
That's how they're built, in
Right.
my opinion. They have to. Everything stems from their defensive effort, energy, and success. That's the bottom line, and that's my underlying problem with this team.
It's what's scary about them.
Exactly. Is why are you 7-8 on the road? You're 16-2 or 15-2 at home.
Right.
We saw what they're capable of yesterday. You should not be below 500
And they're
on the
losing
road.
the bad teams on the road, too. It's not
Exactly.
like they're going into Toronto and just Toronto and losing. They're going into Washington.
And Hunter, you bring up, the Brett Brown criticism and the stagnant offense at times against the zone recently. That's all comes down to effort and energy. So those are the issues. If they just bring it every night, taking care of the basketball, that will fall into place. Rebounding is 100% effort. All of that stuff becomes a lot easier when you just bring it. And this team is built such defensive heavily that when they don't bring it, they're going to look even more uglier than a normal team would.
And this is, again, I don't know if there's ever going to be a full-strength week for this team. I really don't know. And now Thibault's going to be out for a little bit. What did they say, 2 or 3 weeks maybe?
Yeah.
Which means what, 2 months and 6 years?
Yeah, probably about
vernacular?
2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see him in 2023.
Yeah, your grandkids will get a look at
when
him.
Gil comes back.
We should get is there an odds boost on who returns first?
Great.
Gil or Matisse Thybulle? But the reality is, this is as close to full strength as they'll probably be. They had Joel, they had Ben, they had Horford, and they had Jay Rich, right, and Tobias. Tobias continues to be their most consistent player, thankfully.
By far.
Because after that first month, I think we were all wondering what was going to, would he be able to mentally recover from that slump that he was in? Well, he has, and he's been their most consistent player. And this, you look at the team and how balanced they were with Joel having 31, Ben had 15, he took 10 shots. Still like to see Ben take more, but it was a blowout, so I'm not going to complain.
I thought Ben had a really strong game.
He's 2 back-to-back really strong games.
I really did,
now.
and that's
he
like
did.
If Ben plays like this, if Ben played the way he played against the Bucks on Christmas, it shows that even against good teams, and then listen, I know he needs to shoot a mid-range jumper. We've been screaming it forever, but he can still be so effective without it. But there's nights where he just doesn't want to be engaged, and that's where I have the issue. He had 14 assists. I mean, that is very valuable.
He had
7 boards.
17 in Detroit.
I know. So he can affect the game without the jumper, even though I'm the first to scream he needs one. And once again, it goes back to that's why we get irritated as a fan base, because if you're not going to shoot, you can't just not be engaged. That's where we have the issue.
Well, let me ask you a question then. What did you see differently yesterday from Ben Simmons?
He was
differently
willing.
than what?
Than the past?
The prior game or nothing?
No, just his
Nothing.
entire career. That's my point.
Nothing.
So,
and I'm tired of the conversations that start if Ben ...
Me too. So, Hunter, I'm not disagreeing with you. I was very pleased with how Ben Simmons played. He was efficient, right? 14 assists and 2 turnovers. That's what we want from him. But part of that is because of the success around him, and he needs to get credit for that. But if they didn't play historically great yesterday, we might be talking about something different. That's not going to happen every game, as we mentioned. At some point, Ben's going to have to want to score the ball late in big games.
Everything that Ben does well, like he does yesterday, or even the game before when he had a triple-double and he was very impressive, we all know he can do it. It's just like we all know Reese Hoskins any week of any given season can go out there and hit
17 assists aren't a big deal for him.
3 homers in
It's
a week, or 6 RBIs, and we all know that Carson Wentz can look like he's the next great quarterback in a 1 or 2 game stretch. But the problem fans are having is the whole if Ben ... if Reese could just put it, if Carson Wentz can give you that like he did in 2017. And that's where the frustration lies, is because we don't see it game to game.
But I think it's different when Ben has a good game against Detroit and then what you saw against Milwaukee.
Well,
it is.
Because it means way
but don't
more.
you think Ben's
it is
had
different.
good games against really good teams in the past? In the past,
He had a lot of quiet games as well. So when I see
That's
a game
fair.
where he's not quiet, that's what makes the needle move for me with Ben Simmons. When he puts together a game like 15, 14, and 7 with 2 steals, a block against the Bucks, that holds way more value to me than when he does a 17-assist triple-double against the Detroit Pistons the game before.
But here's the difference is he always has those big nights against lesser teams. So he has the huge night in Detroit, and that's status quo for him. And then, like I said, yesterday against the Bucks, it was a historic night offensively. So that's kind of the difference, in my opinion. I'm not knocking him. He had a great day.
But are you claiming the team's success just off Ben Simmons? Like if the Sixers lost that game somehow, but Ben still had 15, 14, and 7 with 2 steals and all that, I don't put it on Ben Simmons unless there's a play at the end where he's unwilling to make a play. That's a different scenario.
I'll just try and keep it simple and I'll exaggerate and be a little bit blunt. He was a victim of his circumstance in a positive way yesterday.
See, I disagree.
That's all I'm
I
saying.
think the reason why they succeeded, though, was because of how strong defensively. I would argue that he is the leader defensively.
Oh, he is.
Right.
Him
So
and Joe.
because his effort,
He impacts the game in so many ways,
Right.
but I'm saying there's going to be some games when he's a lead on defense, when he's dishing the ball and taking care of the ball, that he's going to get away with. I don't mean to be negative with it, but for lack of a better way to explain it, he's going to get away with not being scrutinized because the team's so good. He's an elite defender. He's a great passer. We all know what he does. But at some point in time, we need to see him want the ball in his hands in the fourth quarter when people are playing 6 feet off of him and he's deferring.
Yeah, definitely.
And when he's a liability, that's a problem.
It feels like the Sixers are a front-runner type team. Like when everything breaks right for them from the start, they can have a game like you saw yesterday. It feels like when the seams start to burst or when they're going to have a couple guys out and things aren't going right, then it's a struggle, even against a team that may not be in their echelon.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. And I
you look at the Bucks, and I know they just got their butts kicked, but they are remarkably consistent. They know who they are. They know what they do well, and 8 times out of 9, they're going to win a game, and you don't question as much. To me, I don't think their fans, and maybe their fans today are wondering what the hell happened yesterday.
I'm sure they are a little bit.
But it seems like 8 or 9 times already this year, we'd be like, what? Like that Miami game where you just wonder, where were the Sixers that night?
Like they're going to lose.
That's the problem.
They're going to lose in Orlando Friday, and we can all agree on that, right?
Yeah, they're going to lose the next 2,
Right,
obviously.
exactly.
That's blow a 5-point lead,
Yeah.
something like that, and Ben's going to have a bad game, and you're going to wonder, what happened there?
Now, that fourth quarter, though, that was a different fourth quarter than the rest, in my opinion. There are some fourth quarters where it looks so bad and it's so nerve-wracking and you can't believe what you're seeing. But in that game, I thought it was such a blowout that fourth quarter didn't affect me the way that some other fourth quarters affect me with this team. Now, long
If
term,
we were been on the road, I think I would have been a little more nervous. But I agree with you. I didn't really think they were going to. I was not thinking of the Nuggets game like, oh, my God, we're about to see that happen again.
right. Long term, it's an issue. I think there needs to be a fix with that. Now, Joel Embiid leaves the floor. That changes a lot. But long term, it's an issue. For that game, I did not see it being that much of an issue. It was the Bucks trying to prove a point and stay, I guess, make a statement saying, listen, I know we got beat hard tonight, but we're still going to go until the last minute goes. You know what I mean? That's them trying to make a statement like, hey, we're playing for pride here, even though we're getting blown out on Christmas Day. And that's why the score kind of went in their favor in the fourth quarter.
And Embiid got out of the game.
Right, that's what I was saying. And he left
exactly.
the floor as well. So.
Right.
Do you guys think if the Sixers had their lineup, their anticipated, projected, whatever lineup you want to call it, Horford, J. Rich, Ben, Joel, Tobias.
Yeah.
If they had those 5, I'm not even worried about whether Thibault is healthy or not. Those 5 guys, if they had played 90% of the games this year, do you think the Sixers would have a record that looks more like the Bucks right now record, or do you think it would still look like what the Sixers are now? Which is what, 23-10?
I mean, their record is great right now. That's the craziest part of this entire conversation.
Is great.
They're a very good team, and I think that's why we're going to scrutinize them.
They're also what many people thought going into the year was going to be the team in the East. I think people thought that they were going to be kind of like 27-5, like the Bucks are now.
No, I agree.
From a talent standpoint,
isn't that a historic pace?
Well, I can't predict that the record would be 27-5. Yeah, I don't know either.
It comes more with the eye test on how they look.
Exactly. It would be more. We would have a better understanding of what this team really is and their potential and how they're starting to mesh. They haven't played together. At their best, they're going to look bad on offense. So you start having lack of effort, too many lineups, it's going to look bad, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah, I think 23-10. It could be 25-8. I don't know if it would be something to the most historic record to this point right now, but
right.
I would think they would be in the same ballpark. It would just come down to, would it look better? Would it look smoother? Would the offense have more flow? And that's where the conversation would have if they played more games. Maybe they would have more minutes logged in together, get more flow, understand where people are in certain situations compared to losing all those games because Josh Richardson couldn't play or Al Horford had to sit or Joel Embiid was on load management.
Right. I just wonder if you even took they're 23-10. That's a really good record.
Yeah.
It only doesn't look amazing because the Bucks are 27-5, right?
And because there's other
and also because they're not even second.
I mean, you have a Giants team where Daniel Jones is coming off a 5-touchdown performance.
Yeah, how about that?
Saquon Barkley looks pretty darn good, as he always does. I mean, he was injured earlier this year. That played a part, I think, in some production. But listen, if you have your corners getting, looking like burnt toast and you're not getting pressure, all of a sudden we can be looking at a battle. And I don't know if you want to get into a shootout because the offense has looked great from the Eagles' standpoint.
It's looked okay. I wouldn't say great, right?
Compared to what they did look like. Like, you're confident in this offense now,
They're
I think is my
so
point.
Yes.
Yeah, great's an exaggeration for sure. But Yeah, I think you don't know what you have with this defense.
Yeah, I think defense is the answer, too. And you look at the cornerback situation right now, Rasul Douglas instead of Darby, which, I mean, you can argue that that's not a bad thing, but, you just don't know what you have with those corners. And Sidney Jones maybe even getting in the mix. I know he's made 2 plays, but, his sample size isn't good enough to make me believe that he's now automatically this guy who can shut down maybe someone like Darius Slayton or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, it's got to be the defense. The Jordan Howard thing, it's kind of hard to screw up, you would think. I mean, to me, it's even if you are using Jordan Howard more than Miles Sanders, are you really screwing up? I mean, I don't know.
Is there an argument to be made to start out using Jordan Howard more? Because Miles has been playing so well.
That would be my concern. You mean like kind of throwing a curveball at him?
Yeah,
they expect Miles and they're getting Jordan Howard?
Yeah, let's see Jordan one full series by himself. Let's see how he looks in game action.
I
don't know if we want to go to that degree.
I'd be worried about that.
I'm just, 4 straight plays is my point. I'm not saying give it to him 15 times in the first quarter, but
but my concern would be if they gave it to him and did what you said, Brian, and he averaged like 4 or 5 yards a carry and broke a few, then it's like, all right, I can be 50-50 with these guys now. I don't think there's
I agree with that. I think mine was under the notion that they know Miles Sanders is the guy moving forward, and they're going to use Howard more to preserve him.
Yeah, and maybe you're trying, like the Giants are going to game plan for Miles Sanders usage, and then here's Jordan Howard getting thrown in the mix a lot more, and they're unprepared or not as prepared as maybe they should be. And I mean, I'm leaning towards you, Geoff. You should definitely put Miles Sanders in there more. We don't want to lose too much of him, but if you're going to ask me, is Jordan Howard coming back going to mess this team up more than, say, the defense getting torched? I mean, it's got to be the defense.
I would agree with you. The one thing that sticks out in my mind is, to me, it's elementary. To me, Miles Sanders gets the ball 18 to 25 times, depending on the flow of the game, and you mix Jordan Howard in with those, whatever Boston Scott and who was the other guy getting carries last week? It wasn't a Giant. Did he get? Yeah, he got like 2, right?
He got like 2 or 3.
So can Jordan Howard get 5 to 7 touches? Yes. Medically, that's probably the case anyway because it's going to be his first game in 6 weeks, right? So
yeah, it's going to be rusty. Best
5 to 7. So what about, for example?
Well,
are you thinking the 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 play where Doug decided to throw the ball twice? That's one of the carries that maybe Jordan Howard plows through.
That's what gets into my next point. Is that to me it seems elementary that Miles is still your lead back and you work Jordan in maybe situationally like that. But our biggest criticism this year with the coaching staff has not necessarily been X's and O's or play calling. It's more decision making, right? Getting players
timely
prepared
decision making or
for certain roles.
Okay.
Whether it's J.J. Arcega-Whiteside or not playing him a little bit more earlier or having him ready to play all the positions.
That's
or
more big
hanging
picture
on to Mac.
decision.
So that's kind of my big picture concern is that does Doug go into this saying, we've really leaned a lot on Miles Sanders. He's a rookie. We have a chance to get Jordan Howard back. We're successful. Do we do a 60-40 split? Does it become that Miles goes back to touching the ball 12 to 15 times and we try to get Jordan 8 to 10? I think early in the year people would have loved that. I have said from the start, no, I want this 3-down running back to run your offense. You need him now just as badly as you did in September. You're still not that much better on offense from a weapon standpoint.
No,
you
certainly
need
not.
Miles Sanders on the field 75% of the plays.
Isn't this a playoff game?
Yes.
I feel like we're all not like you or me, but I feel like Eagles Nation, air quotes, as a whole is like kind of not realizing the importance of this game because of the Cowboys' big win and
do you
the
think
fact
that people think this game is wrapped up already?
I don't know. I just think that win has. Well, how do you feel?
I feel like people are scared of the Giants. They have some kind of.
I don't think people are scared of the Giants. I think they're scared of the Eagles.
You're right. Yeah. That's what I hear. Right. I feel like people, and I don't blame anybody for thinking this way because this was what you and I said 3 or 4 weeks ago when we felt the Eagles wouldn't be in this position. Is that it's hard to see this team. Although this is a far different team that they're putting out than they were 4 weeks ago, it's hard to see them being consistent, winning 4 games when they haven't shown you that they can consistently catch the ball, consistently stop wide receivers, consistently do X, Y, and Z. And now that they've done it for 3 weeks, I think instead of thinking, wow, they've solved that, you're waiting now for the whole shoe to drop against a really bad Giants team where 3 fumbles, 3 times beaten over the top, all the things, 5 drops of the football, all the things that over the last 3 weeks that they've done well, all of a sudden it's like Pandora's box opens and the Eagles go back to being the Eagles.
Yes. That's
where I think people fear.
I think that's a realistic concern. Don't you guys?
I would agree with you.
I mean,
yes.
let me flip it. What are you most confident about with this team?
Well, that's.
I guess the answer
that could
is,
help answer your question.
I was going to say that the one thing you brought up before, Mosher, is like this isn't the same team though. This is not the same team. And it's not just because of the way they're playing. It's because the personnel is actually different. I mean, you have different guys in there now over Alshon and Nelson Aguilar. So it isn't the same exact team. But you asked me, what am I most confident about this team right now? It's got to be the offense, which is almost making me crack up inside. I mean, to think I'm sitting here in the last week saying I'm most confident about the offense right now,
but I would ask,
what about the offense?
Yeah, because they have not been prolific.
Is it because the defense is that bad? That's the better side of the ball. But is the defense that bad? We talk about how good they are at home. So you're right. Because they're not putrid anymore. They're just moving the ball a little bit.
That's what the measuring stick now
right,
has become.
Not being putrid.
And it's funny sometimes, Ryan, right? How like a winning streak almost makes people rewrite the history. For example, the people who are very optimistic, we're 3 in a row. We're good. Yeah. We got Hunter here. I like the offense. They were losing in the Giants game and had to come back. Carson did not play a great game. He played a great fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. They were losing in the Redskins game. That wasn't a great game. That was a great fourth quarter. And then they beat Dallas in what was a way better defensive game than offensive game.
Yeah, offense didn't look great.
So even though they've won 3 in a row and have defied a lot of odds and maybe skeptics, they've answered. It's not like they've been this like machine in all 3 games to where you say, well, they should beat this Giants team by 20 points. You know, I mean they should, but you can also see them not.
They were in 3 knock them out, drag them out, 12-round heavyweight boxing fights against 3-win teams for 3 straight weeks. And we're sitting here booking our flight to Miami. I mean, I just don't, that's what fans are doing. Like, I just don't know. Maybe we will be booking that flight, but I wouldn't be shocked. Obviously, me and you, Mosher, have been on that standpoint for a while. I wouldn't be shocked if they don't make the playoffs.
Well, I've purposely not looked at lines because, I'm sure in the 5 o'clock hour we're going to do our
NFL schedule,
and we'll
spreads,
go look. So
yeah.
I don't know what the Eagles-Giants line is right now. We'll talk about it later. But I might have to think that would be pretty hard to have formulated.
What, the spread?
Yeah, because Vegas takes into account what you and I and Hunter just talked about, the idea that you might have won 3 in a row, but who did you beat? Did you really look good? They factor everything in.
But do we feel like the Eagles are going to win because they're playing the Giants, who are not as good as the Eagles, more than it is how good the Eagles really are?
That's a great – like, if you do talent for talent, are the Eagles 53 – or I'm sorry.
Well, didn't we just –
are they better than the Giants 53?
Didn't we just establish that talent versus talent on paper doesn't mean anything? Because on paper, the Cowboys should be destroying. Yes,
because then there's coaching. Well, I was going to get – I was going to advance past that eventually.
Right. On paper, you could argue that maybe the Giants, talent-wise, that wide receiver, are better than the Eagles.
I would say you can make an argument that skill position talent highly favors, especially if Zach Ertz doesn't play the Giants. There's no argument that defensive talent favors the Eagles.
Right.
But the problem is, this is a road game, so I don't know what defense we're going to see.
And I'm not trying to make excuses for like the Cowboys. I would never do that. But how much of a factor is the opposing team just struggling within themselves at the link at a 6:00 night game with the division on the line? Mm-hmm. How much is it? Like Dak didn't lift his shoulder for 7 straight days and didn't practice all week. I'm not taking away things from the Eagles, but hate to tell you guys, that's a factor in what we saw in those wins, I think, the past 3 weeks is different elements. And
by the way, we have to get to some of the comments that came from Dak Prescott, not only about the future, but about what he was doing in that game. I don't know if you guys saw, but
yeah, we'll have to get to
He was getting treatment in the middle of the game, going to the locker room early. So
he was banged up.
They should have won that game. They had 3 wide open let me say this. They should have at least been in position to tie the game, right? Because on the final drive, the Eagles got a little bit lucky.
But
certainly the receivers got behind them.
For sure.
There's so many things that factor in, though. Like, the what-ifs, I totally understand. You're right. I mean, what if they did catch that football, and I believe, was it Gallup who beat Rasul Douglas on the left side?
There was one Gallup and one Tavon Austin.
And Tavon
Austin. That's who it was on the Rasul play. But there's so many what-ifs, right? Like, what if Dak threw a better throw there? Well, what if Doug Peterson punted the ball? Or, what if Doug Peterson or what if Jake Elliott nailed one of those field goals? So, I do get that mindset because it was such a big play late in the game. But there are so many what ifs that can happen in any sport, in any what if they called that the Lakers ball?
Right.
No, we don't need to do that.
By the way, another real passionate sports argument in my at the Christmas dinner the other night was the whole Wentz versus Foles. And
that's interesting. Same here.
And I got my brother-in-law really good. I got him good because he's harsh on Carson, which is fine. He's the type of person that thinks if you're defending Carson, you're saying he's a top 5 quarterback. So we had to set the rules. No.
Yeah.
No one.
It's not one extreme or the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We're not playing extremism here.
Yeah.
But he was going back to the Seattle and New England game, saying, "Look, if you are a really good quarterback and a leader, you figure out a way to win that game." Mm-hmm. And I just said, not for nothing, did he not put the ball in Nelson Aguilar's hands at the end of the game, as well as you could have done, and the ball was dropped? Yeah. And he goes, "I don't think that matters. What about all the plays that came before that he could have made?" And then he, later in the argument, he started talking about Foles and the New Orleans game and, how they should have won that game. He goes, that's what Foles gives you, that leadership. They should have beat New Orleans. Oh, if Alshon doesn't drop that ball at the end of the game. I said, well, wait a minute. Alshon dropped the ball at the end of the game. You just told me when Nelson Aguilar does it for Wentz, that's on Wentz. How come this one's not on Foles?
It's the perfect what you have done in your career, and that shapes perception to reality for people. It's crazy.
I love calling a guy on one when he uses one analogy. Then you the same one that works against him. It doesn't count. It doesn't matter.
When you got them. I had the same conversation. My one girlfriend. Let me clarify that. The one girlfriend.
Sure, yeah.
Her grandfather, who's a little bit older, of course. He was
breaking news. Your girlfriend's grandfather.
That's a little bit rude of you to say.
No, but I mean, he's trying to tell me that Carson Wentz is a bad quarterback, and I'm sitting there. I'm not trying to be rude, right? I don't want to start breaking down things and go real heavy on him. So I sit back and say, you're right, right? But am I going to rip into the grandfather? I'll be out of the house eating outside.
Your grandfather, you'd probably said it, but it's your girlfriend's grandfather. You got to play it close to the vest.
Yeah, it's I hate that guy too. I hate Carson. He's the worst.
Nick Foles should be here.
Now, when you're 10 years into a marriage like me, you can yell at anybody. You just start.
I'm 7 years in. No, not married, but 7 years is a decent amount of time in. So if I wanted to give it a little pushback,
there's no ring on your finger.
You're right.
You're not until the knot is tied, and you got at least a decade in.
And your life is officially over.
Right.
Perfect. I hope she's listening.
That's not where I was going with that. Hold on. You got me to agree to something I did not mean to agree to.
Mosher's yep, and I'm when you become a loser like Geoff, that's when. No, I kid.
Anyway, it was a wonderful sports argument. And I appreciate the passion. My wife's family are from South Philly. I'm a very passionate sports fan.
Those arguments I don't think are ever going to go away. And it's crazy how they're still happening 2 years later.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of the Donovan arguments from 10 to 12
years
away,
ago. Though. I mean, it's not like
but I don't know if it will until Carson wins the Super Bowl, I would say.
But it's just so obvious that Nick Foles and what he did here, I mean, it was great. It was a great, miraculous run. But, if you look throughout his entire career, that year is so out there compared to the rest of his career that you can't say that's who he is all the time.
I think they would say, because I've heard it from my uncles and cousins a million times, they would say, yeah, but it's who he was here with Doug Pederson and that team. Yeah, I don't agree with it, but.
Hey, it's like the LeBron argument. There's always going to be a side that you're I don't know where you're coming from, man.
Yeah, exactly.
But you do you. You mentioned Sidney Jones. Was it you?
No, I did.
I didn't mention Sidney Jones.
Are you a little surprised they're going back to Rasul?
No, I'm not, because Sidney Jones got thrown in there for, was it Washington where he made the breakup at the line of scrimmage? Yeah. He was press coverage, swatted right away.
No, it was, I think, Giants that he did that.
The Giants play, okay. Yeah. And then he did it against the Cowboys.
Right.
That's like saying, well, wow, Furkan Korkmaz made 2 3-pointers. Well, that's great, but how many times is he horrendous on defense, misses 3-pointers? So,
right, but you're also comparing Furkan to who would normally play in that spot like a starter. Right?
Or Matisse Thybulle.
Who's
which I would rather have
way
Matisse.
better player, fair to say?
Would you say that Matisse
Thybulle than Furkan?
I guess what I'm saying is, I know what you're saying, that Sidney Jones hasn't done anything, but you're comparing him to Rasul Douglas, who likewise has not done anything, has just given you more sample size to say he hasn't done anything.
Okay, no, you're fair. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right with that. And with speed receivers, I think Rasul Douglas is going to have a really tough time. So maybe you do go with – maybe Doug Pederson is going with – okay, both of these guys don't have enough on their resume right now for my – I mean, Rasul does, but maybe he's going with just being in the moment more, just going with experience more. Sidney's a little bit more raw. He made some good plays, but Rasul has at least been out there getting torched. Now, he's been getting torched, but he's at least been out there. So maybe they're going with the mentality of at least he has experience in a game that we really need. I don't know if that's the right answer. I'm just trying to put myself in his position.
Should Sidney Jones come back next year? He's got 1 year left on his deal.
Kind of have to with where you drafted him, no?
Yeah, what's the option?
Look,
I don't know.
You say that, but literally 3 weeks ago, when he made that pass breakup, that wasn't supposed to be him. It was supposed to be Craig James. And Craig James, 3 weeks ago, was like 5th out of your corners. So Sidney's 6th. So they don't say we drafted him a second. We have to at least make him a backup corner. They literally put him as far down on the totem pole as they can get. They've even deactivated him at
I'm
points.
the first person to admit I'm anti-Sidney Jones. So I don't like him as a player. But if they're going to go with this narrative and this notion next year that we're just going to use a ton of cornerbacks and none of them are going to be great, but we're going to have a lot of bodies, because that seems to be what they do, right? Here's just a ton of them. We don't know if they work.